Wowie zowie, have I got a great project for you today. It's a lot bigger than some of the other ones we've done, but I've done a lot of the work for you. You need to create the form. I provide most of the code, and then you will have a project that you will say, wow, I can't believe I actually did this one. You're going to have to go off and show everybody what you did.
The purpose of this project will be to create a menu system for a fast food restaurant using Visual Basic. To implement the project, we'll be using group boxes, radio buttons, check boxes, regular buttons, and list boxes. The menu system that I've implemented includes hamburgers, fish sandwiches, chicken sandwiches, along with cheese and tomato, sodas, and extras like fries and onion rings. You are free to choose any type of items you wish to sell. Maybe you want a vegetarian meal with falafels and cheese sandwiches. Here is a sample run of the program where a customer wants a cheeseburger. I'll click the hamburger with cheese and a cola. When I click the enter button, now it shows that I have a hamburger, cheese, and a drink. The subtotal is $4.10, tax is 36 cents, and the total is $4.46. When the next customer comes in, I'll click the clear button to clear the entry and start up with a new transaction. Let's say the next customer wants a hamburger with cheese, a soda. I'll say enter. But he has a friend also is paying for the same thing, and the friend wants a fish sandwich with cheese and tomato, a root beer, and onion rings. I'll say enter. And now I have a grand total of $12.18, including the 98 cents tax. Now notice this right here is a list box, so I can scroll up and down to see the full order. When I click clear, everything is cleared. The sandwich goes back to none. The drinks go back to none. All the other items are cleared off. I can start a new transaction. Suppose somebody only wants a cola. Say enter. There's my price with the tax and the total. When I'm done, I'll click clear. I'll create the form using tools from the toolbox. At the top, I'm going to have a label. I'll set that font size to size 20 and bold. I'll have a group box. Group boxes are special because these are containers and they can contain other objects. The objects I have in this group box are going to be radio buttons and check boxes. Now what's nice about a radio button, only one item in a collection of radio buttons can be clicked at a time. It's called a radio button because it's like the buttons on the radio for your car. You push one of the buttons and you select one station. You press another button and you get another station. You only get one station at a time. The check boxes are different. You can have as many of the check boxes or none of the check boxes active at the same time. So I could have both cheese and tomato, or none of them, or just cheese, or just tomatoes. Here are the buttons. We're pretty much familiar with these buttons. I have enter, clear, and exit. If you look close at the buttons, you may notice that there is an underline underneath the E for enter, an underline underneath the L for clear, and an underline underneath the X for exit. These are called access keys. We can implement the access key by putting an ampersand in front of a letter in the text property for the button. We'll show you that later. Here's something new, list boxes. With a list box, we can put data into the list box and just keep adding more and more data. If we get too much data to fit in the list box, then scroll bars appear and we can scroll up and down for the list box. There are all sorts of other things we can do with list boxes we'll cover later, such as sorting a list box, reorganizing it, adding into the middle, etc. For this project, I'll be using a structured design which includes a hierarchy of functions or subroutines. For example, in the higher level, I have my event handlers. I'll have a form load event that occurs as soon as the program runs and brings the form up and displays it. I'll have other events for the clear button, the enter button, and the exit button. The form load event then is going to call some other subroutines, which is one of them is going to initialize the variables, another one to clear the receipt, another one to clear the selections. The same set of subroutines also gets activated by the clear button event. The enter button is going to be able to clear the selections, compute the selections, and update the total. The exit button event doesn't call any other subroutines or procedures, it just closes the program. Down at the bottom I have my class level constants and variables. When I start writing the code, actually these will appear at the top of the code. Here's a brief description of each of the subtasks. Initialize the variables. Set all the variables to 0. Clear the receipt. Clear the 2 list boxes that are used for the customer receipt and display the subtotal, tax, and total. Clear selections. We need to notice that the radio buttons and the checkboxes work a little bit differently. Each of the radio buttons and checkboxes have a property called checked. It's a Boolean property that can be set to true or false. If it's true, then checked is active, and if it's false, checked is not active. For example, with the radio buttons, only one radio button can be active at a time. So when I want to clear the selections for the radio buttons, I want to set the none radio button click property to true. For the checkboxes, I want to set the checked property for each of the checkboxes to false. That will clear the selections. Compute selections. Examine each customer selection. I want to look at each of the radio buttons or checkboxes and add the price of the item to the subtotal. Update receipt. Display the number of items and price for each group. Compute and display the subtotal, tax, and total. Let's start the fast food project. First, I'll start Microsoft Visual Studio. I'm going to say File, New Project. I want to make sure that I select Visual Basic, a Windows Forms application, and I'm going to give it a name, Fast Food. I have to make sure I don't put any spaces in my project names though. Here's the form. I want to make sure I'm displaying the toolbox. I also want to make sure that I'm displaying the properties window. Also, I'm going to need a bigger form. For the title on the form, I'll set the text box to Dan's Fast Food. To change the text on the title bar, I'll set the text property for the form, and I'm going to set that to Dan's Fast Food Restaurant. This time I can have spaces because this is not the name of an object. When I press the Enter key, now it shows up here on the title bar. I want the same text to show up as a label at the top of my screen. So in the text box for the label, I'll put in, again, Dan's Fast Food Restaurant. To make it a little bit bigger, I want to set the font to size 20, bold. Oh, now that looks good. Here comes the group box for sandwiches. The group box is a container. It can hold other objects, and it's listed here as a container. So I'll set my group box right here. The text property for the group box, I'm going to put in sandwich. That's the title that shows right at the top of the group box. Since it is a container, I want to make sure that it is selected when I put in the radio buttons. The first radio button I'll put inside this group box is going to be called None. The second radio button I'll put in the group box, I'll put in for my hamburger. I'm also going to put in the price that will show up on the screen, but since this is part of text, I can't really use it as a computation at this point. Price for my hamburger, I'm going to set at $2.75. Now, one thing I noticed is these aren't quite aligned right. So I can slide this around. Look at that. There's my alignment marks. That helps me make my presentation look nice. The next radio button I'm going to do is going to be for the fish sandwich. That's going to be $3.25. one more radio button, and this radio button is going to be for the chicken sandwich. And I have brought that price at $2.49. I want 2 check boxes. I'll put in a checkbox, if I can find it. I want 2 check boxes. I'll put in a checkbox for cheese, and that's going to be 10 cents. And one more checkbox for tomatoes. Tomatoes are 20 cents. And again, I want to make sure that all these are lined up so it looks nice. Okay, everything fits in there. For me, I have a hard time looking at this and seeing where the checkbox is. So I'm going to set the background color for my fast food restaurant for the whole form. Make sure the form is selected. Go and find the background color. Web has a whole lot of cool colors in here. And how about if I set it to, no, set a dark cayenne or so. Well, maybe that's too dark. That's okay. I want to set the background color for my group box here. Something lighter, just so it looks good. Here are the buttons. I'll set a button for enter. Down here at the text, I'll say enter, but this time I want to have the letter E. I want to have the letter E underlined, so I'll do an ampersand, E-N-T-E-R. So now I have an underline underneath the letter E. To make it easy so that all my buttons will be the same size, I'll select a button, Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and then I'll just line this next button up so that it'll be at the same horizontal location, and this will be for the clear. I'll do the capital C ampersand L-E-A-R. We underline the L because a lot of times other buttons have already used the underlined C for a cancel. Do the same thing again, copy paste. I have one more button, and this will be my exit button, E ampersand XIT. I want 2 more group boxes, one for drinks and one for extras. Again, here's my container. I'll set a group box over here for drinks. I'll set the text to drinks. And again, for my radio buttons, I'm going to start off with none. Another radio button. For cola. Another radio button for orange, and another radio button for root beer. I guess I can actually, up here on the top for the text, I'll say drinks, since they're all the same price, I'll put in $1.25. To make it look nice, I'm going to set the background color for this guy right here to light blue. And resize this so that I get a little bit more real estate on the screen. One more group box, and this last group box is going to be for my extras. The text for this, extras, and I'll do 2 check boxes. First one, $1.29 for fries. One more for onion rings at $2.30. Set the background color to light blue. Looks like I'll need a little bit more room for my list boxes. Here comes my first list box. I want to make this one here big enough to hold several lines of items that are being sold. And then another list box that's not quite as big. It only needs 3 lines of text. Well, there's my form. The next thing I need to do is to make sure that I give every object a name. You can use different names if you wish, but they must be meaningful. The name that you're using for an object must be exactly the same as when you are writing the code. I'm using the first 3 letters of the name for an object in lowercase to identify the type of the object. For example, for the form, I'm calling it FRM fast food. I cannot have any spaces in my names, but I can use an underscore if I wish. LBL title, but that's going to be used for the title at the top of the screen. BTN clear, BTN enter, BTN exit. Those are my 3 buttons. CHK, these are for the check boxes. RAD, these are for the radio buttons. I have the radio button for no sandwich, hamburger, chicken sandwich, and fish sandwich. I have radio buttons for no drink, cola, orange, and root beer. Finally, I have my list boxes, LST. List box for the order receipt and list box for total. The first object I'm going to name is the form. I have to make sure that I select the form. Now I can see the form is selected because there's these little square boxes on the edges of the form. I have to scroll up for the properties to get the name property. Here's form, FRM, fast food. Press enter. Naming the rest of the objects is going to be very easy because since the name property is selected, it's going to remain selected for all of the other objects. Here's a group box. I select my first group box, GRP sandwich. Here's a radio button, RAD no sandwich, RAD hamburger. Now you kind of have to be careful because if you click in here, you have to make sure that you actually get the radio button, because if you're just a little bit outside, then you're going to end up selecting the group box. So make sure that you have it selected. You can see it by there's this little dashed line around the outside. The name here is going to be RAD fish sandwich, RAD chicken sandwich. Here's a checkbox, CHK cheese and CHK tomato. A button, BTN enter, BTN clear, BTN exit. I'll let you worry about the rest of them. I have just finished naming all the objects on the form. One of the things you can do is look at the properties, this properties window right here. Right underneath where it says properties, this is identifying the current object that is selected. There's a little down arrow right there, and it's listing all of the names for each of the objects. And I see label 1. Whoa, that means I got something in there that's probably not identified. That should have been LBL title. Press enter. Now I can go back again. I can go down again and look at a list of all my objects and make sure that each one of them has a good name. It's time to put in the code. First thing I'll do is double click on an empty area of the form. When I double click on the empty area of the form, I get my load event. To get more room so I can see more stuff, I'm going to click on this little push pin so that it's an auto hide. I can always bring it back. If I just scroll over it, it shows up. But as soon as I move off, it goes away. If I want it to stay, then I'll put the push pin down. If I want it to be auto hide, push pin sideways. Here's my load event. So remember what I want to do in the load event? I want to clear everything. Since I already gave you the code, you can just do a cut and paste for the code right off of the website. If I go to the website, I can get a list of all the code, and then I'll just say Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and then paste everything in here, Control A, and then paste it, and I should have everything that I put from the website. Now, this is only going to work if you use the same names for the objects that I used. I want to start off and start looking at some of the code here. Now, here's something nice. If I hold down the Control key, I can use the roller ball on my mouse and zoom in and zoom out on things. Here are the class level constants. Class level constants are defined outside of any subroutine. With a class level constant or class level variable, these variables and constants can be seen by every subroutine that is in the file. One of the things I do with constants, I'll start off and say const, C-O-N-S-T. Then I'll give the name of the constant, and I'll do it all in capital letters. I'll use capital letters as a standard to identify that this is a constant as opposed to a variable. Const tax rate is decimal equals 0.0875, and I'll put a comment right here that I'm saying that this is an 8.75 tax rate. I'll do more constants here for the price of the hamburger, the price of the fish sandwich, chicken, cheese, and tomato. You need to complete the list to include the price of the other items for the drinks, for the fries, and for the onion rings. Here are some class level variables: subtotal, tax, and total. Here is the form load event. I'm going to initialize the variables, clear the customer selections, and clear the receipt. One thing you might notice is that open close parentheses. That identifies that instead of being a variable or a constant, this is the name of a subroutine or a function. What happens with a subroutine or a function, it's like you have a boss and he says to the subworker, he says to the worker, go do a certain task and come back and tell me when you are done. That's what happens with these subroutines. So later on, we're going to see the subroutine for initialized variables. Oh, and here it is right here. Initialize variables. Set subtotal to 0, tax to 0, and the total to 0. I would like to have it as a subroutine because later on there might be some other part of the code that needs to do the same thing. If I have discovered later that I need to initialize more variables, it's very convenient to put it inside this initialized variable subroutine instead of having to worry about how many other places do I need to put in the initialization code. Here's some more code to clear the customer selections. Rad no sandwich dot checked is true. That's going to set all the other sandwich selections to a false. I'll set the cheese checked to a false and the tomato checked to a false. You need to clear the drinks and the extras as similar. Here is clear the receipts. Now, since these are list boxes, they work a little bit different. I have to give it the name of the list box and say dot items and then dot and clear. So clear is the name of a subroutine that belongs to a list box. That'll clear the customer receipt, LST order receipt.items.clear. So I got my total and I also have all of my receipts. So those two list boxes will be cleared. The code for compute current selection is a little bit more complicated. For each item, I need to do two things. I need to update the subtotal to include the price of that item. I also need to put in the text into the list box for the receipt so that it will show up as what is being ordered. For example, right here for a hamburger, since each of these items is either a radio button or a checkbox, they each have a property called checked. It's a Boolean property. It is either true or false. So I can say if Brad hamburger dot checked, and the result is going to be true or false. If it's checked, the result is true. If it's not checked, the result is false. So if the hamburger is checked, then I'll set my subtotal. I'll add into it. So plus equals is going to add the price of the hamburger into the subtotal. The next thing I want to do is to update the order receipt to include the hamburger. I'm creating a local variable right here, dim hamburger item as string. So this is a local variable that only exists within this if and if block. I'll say dim hamburger string equal. Now you see right here where I have the underscore. Some of the newer versions of Visual Basic you can get by without it, but the underscore means that I want to conclude the next line as part of the same statement. So I was running out of room on the screen, so I did the underscore so that I can keep the rest of this single statement. I can move it down to the next line. So I'll say hamburger item as string equals price hamburger dot toString. The price of the hamburger is $2.75, so that's 2.75. I want to convert that to a string. ToString has several options, and I select those by putting that inside the parentheses. The quote C quote says I want to convert this into currency. For the United States, I'll get a $sign, the dollar amount, a decimal place, and 2 digits past the decimal. If I was in England, instead of a $sign, I get the pound sign. If I was the rest of Europe and the Eurozone, I would get the euro symbol. If I was in Japan, I would get the yen. I have the price of the hamburger converted to a string that includes the currency, a decimal place, and 2 decimals, and then over here is the ampersand. For strings, the ampersand means concatenate. I want to take one string and I want to add another string onto the end. So I'll put in, I have the price. I want to make sure I have a space right here so it doesn't say hamburger right next to the 2 digits for the pennies. So it's going to say the price of the hamburger, and then it's going to say hamburger. I put all that together in this hamburger string. Then I'm going to say for my list box, the list order receipts dot items dot add, and I'm going to add into the order receipts the string that I just created. I'll do the same thing for the fish sandwich. I'll do the same thing for the chicken sandwich. I'll do the same thing for the cheese. I'll do the same thing for the tomato. Then you need to do the same thing for the drinks and the extra items, which include fries and onion rings. So if you can just follow the same format, you'll be set up. Now if you choose to do falafels or cheese sandwiches or something else, then you can modify this code to fit whatever you're working on. Here is another subroutine. It says private sub update total. First thing I want to do is to clear the previous subtotal tax and total. So that list box is going to get cleared. Then I'm going to add a line into the list box that says subtotal equals, and then the same type of thing to string. I'll compute the tax. The tax is equal to the subtotal times the tax rate. Then add that line into the list box for total. Compute and display the total. Now the grand total is going to be the subtotal plus the tax. And then I'll add those two together and then put that into the list box. Right at the end, I'm going to put a whole bunch of dashes in my list box just to separate each person's order on the receipt. Here's the code for the enter, clear, and exit buttons. For enter, compute the current selection, update the total, and then clear the customer selection so that I'm ready to do a brand new order without having anything showing from the previous selections. Here's the clear. Initialize the variables. It's going to clear out the subroutine and the tax and the total. Clear the customer selections, clear the form, clear the receipt, and here's my exit, me.close.
Well, there it is. This should be an exciting project for you to complete. I've given you most of the code. You can put the form together and make it work. I hope you really enjoy this one. I've tried to describe what happens on each line of the code so that you can know what's going on and then properly update the code and make a full project. I hope you have fun with this one. Yes!